fantastic and lovely morning in the capital, Thursday, the 17th of July, 2025. The time has clocked 5 minutes past the hour of 10 o'clock. Good morning to you, the awesome GIC viewers and listeners within and beyond the borders of the Republic of Namibia. And a very warm welcome to your Thursday morning edition of the Office's Ministries and Agencies Information Sharing Session. As always, we are coming to you live from the Government Information Center here in the nation's capital. For this morning's episode, I am your host, Heleni Philippus Hamunyela. Now, for this morning's edition, we are discussing the Ombudsman's role as a human rights institution. And I'm joined in the studio by the Chief of Office in the Office of the Ombudsman, Ms. Ingrid Hasselman. And she's here to expound more on this topic. Ms. Hasselman, good morning once again. It's an honor to have you in studio with me this morning.
Good morning, Eleni. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, Namibia, as is the norm, I'd like to pause here and extend a warm invitation to you to be part of this conversation by following the discussion on our social media platforms, where we are kindly streaming this show live. On Facebook, we are at the Government Information Center studio and as well as on YouTube. Add your voice to this conversation by posting your contributions on our social media, on our comment sections on our social media platforms where we are currently streaming this show live. Now, Ms. Hasselman, I'd like to break the ice to this conversation, as first things first, I'd like to find out from you, briefly talk to us about what the Office of the Ombudsman is, when was it established, and what necessitated the establishment of the Office of the Ombudsman.
Lenny, and the word ombuds is a word that is derived from a Swedish word. And the whole idea behind it really is, it means representative of the citizen. Okay. Because government is so big and so powerful, and an individual who sometimes approaches government to get services might be faced with a lot of bureaucracy. And when they complain, then their complaints are not really heard. So the idea is for there to be an ombudsman, a representative of the, like a high-level individual, to be a representative of the person. So the Constitution of Namibia made provision for the establishment of the ombudsman. So there's a whole chapter in the Constitution that is dedicated, chapter 10 of the Constitution, that is dedicated to the establishment of the Office of the Ombudsman. Then there's also an Act of Parliament, the Ombudsman's Act, that establishes the office, and that was done in 1990, and the very first ombudsman was appointed in 1990. So the office has been in existence for as long as we have been in independent Namibia, for the past 35 years.
All right. Okay. Now, Ms. Hasselman, for the benefit of the viewers and listeners tuned in right now, briefly talk to us about the mandate of the Office of the Ombudsman.
So the Office of the Ombudsman has a very wide mandate. So traditionally in other countries where they have ombudsmen, it is typically a traditional ombudsman which deals with maladministration. So they receive complaints about government inefficiencies or people not getting services from ministries, offices or agencies. So that is very much also part of the Ombudsman of Namibia, to be a watchdog for government accountability and good governance. But in addition to that mandate, the Ombudsman in Namibia is also the National Human Rights Institution. So that means that the Ombudsman has an additional mandate, which is the protection and the promotion of human rights. And the Constitution goes even further than that to give the Ombudsman an additional mandate, which is the protection against environmental harm. And then, in addition, initially in 1990, the Ombudsman was also mandated to investigate complaints of corruption, but with the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Commission, that part of its mandate was taken away. So currently the Ombudsman is there to advance human rights and receive complaints about maladministration in government.
Okay. Now, now that we know the mandate, briefly talk to us about some of your key strategic goals and policies or initiatives that the Ombudsman is currently implementing or envisions to implement.
The Ombudsman Advocate Basileus Diakwa was appointed in 2021.
Okay.
And he has a strategic goal, several issues of which I will highlight some.
Okay.
The first is to promote and protect the rights of indigenous and marginalized communities specifically, and to advocate for their rights and to make sure that their voices are heard in policy making and decision-making in government. And then a further goal is also to enhance the capacity of the Children's Advocate in the Office of the Ombudsman. And the Children's Advocate is there to advance specifically the rights of children in the country. And then an additional strategic goal is to integrate the issues of environmental protection into governance and accountability across all sectors in government.
Okay.
And a further goal is for the Ombudsman to be capacitated further by the passing of the Ombudsman Bill that was in Parliament earlier this year. The passing of that piece of legislation will mean that the Ombudsman will be independent from the Ministry of Justice and Labour Relations, under which it is currently housed.
Okay. Now, building onto that foundation on the strategic implementations currently underway at the Office of the Ombudsman, how does your institution contribute to National Human Rights Action Plan? Or, better yet, how does it align to work with Namibia on a broader human rights commitment?
So the Office of the Ombudsman coordinated the development of the very first National Human Rights Action Plan in Namibia, which was for the period 2015 to 2020.
Okay.
Now, there has never been a comprehensive review of that plan because of COVID and some other reasons. So currently the role that the Ombudsman would be playing in this process is to provide expert advice and coordinate a comprehensive review of that plan to really determine how impactful it was, to identify any gaps in terms of its implementation, and identify best practices going forward, and then also to develop a successor National Human Rights Action Plan in the future. And as far as the Ombudsman's role is concerned in advancing human rights, in line with Namibia's international obligations towards the UN and the African Union treaty bodies, we do report on the human rights landscape in Namibia, and we also hold government accountable to implement some of the recommendations that are made by these treaty bodies.
All right. Now, of course, no plan can succeed without the voice of the people. What steps are being taken to ensure inclusivity and participation, especially for marginalized and vulnerable groups in Namibia, in the design and implementation of the Ombudsman's programs?
So the Ombudsman has an outreach program that it does each and every year. So part of that outreach program is, maybe I must start off by saying that the Ombudsman has offices in 7 out of the 14 regions. So we have offices here in Windhoek, and then we also have offices in the south in Keetmanshoop, and then at the coast in Swakopmund, and then we have an office in Otjiwarongo, and then we have another one in Katima-Mulilo, and then a further one in Ongwediva. And then recently this year, we also opened an office in the Kavango East region that is housed in Rundu. So because we do not have presence in all the regions, it is very important for us to reach all communities, especially rural and informal areas, as well as really underrepresented regions in the country. So in order to do that, we have a very comprehensive outreach program, which means that we go and visit annually these outlying constituencies, and we have community meetings where we tell people about the mandate of the Office of the Ombudsman. We also inform them about human rights in general and where to go if they feel that their rights are being violated. And in addition to that, we also really reach out to children specifically, because it's very important that children's voices are heard. That old saying of children must be seen and not heard is really not applicable anymore in the world that we are living in currently, where children are bombarded with violence in all spheres of life. So we reach out to children and we talk to them and make sure that their voices are also heard in government planning and in policy making.
Okay. Now, having said about the outreach programs, I'd like to find out what are some of the initiatives apart from, because I know that you did mention that you don't have footprints in all the 14 regions of Namibia. What are some of the programs that you do? How do you reach your stakeholders on the grassroots levels?
So currently, we reach out to stakeholders periodically, depending on what type of program we have going on, despite, aside from now the annual outreach program where we visit constituencies. So one of the programs that we are currently doing is we are doing human rights-based assessment of the impacts of climate change in Namibia, and we are focusing specifically on indigenous, rural and marginalized communities. So we have identified communities in each and every region in Namibia, and we will be conducting this program throughout the course of this year, where we go to these communities, meet with small groups, and explain to them what climate change is and how climate change may impact their everyday living. And the goal really there is to hear from the people on the ground themselves as to how climate change affects their everyday life in terms of food scarcity or water shortages or displacement, perhaps because of floods or severe drought. And then to also find out from them whether government's climate adaptability policies or climate resilience policies are being implemented fairly and consistently across the communities that need it most.
All right. Now that is very important, stakeholder engagement, especially those on the grassroots levels. Talk to me about some of the challenges you've encountered, in reaching, penetrating through to your stakeholders at the grassroots levels.
I think one of the major obstacles that we have encountered is that we often need the services of interpreters, especially when we reach out to indigenous communities.
Right.
Because even though the Ombudsman strives to employ staff from all tribes and ethnicities in Namibia to be able to communicate to people in their mother tongue, that remains a problem. And sometimes we can also not really get hold of people who speak indigenous languages to translate properly.
Okay. Now that brings me to, another aspect. Is there perhaps any plans to have the documents translated in the different vernaculars? Because given the communication barrier now that you have an important, let's say, policy of the Ombudsman, but now it is drafted in English, but we need to now go to the grassroots level and have it translated. Are there any plans to perhaps translate that?
Like with everything else in life, funding is always a challenge to the Office of the Ombudsman. Okay. We do have awareness-raising material in the form of pamphlets, just informing people of their basic human rights, and we have that translated into 5 different languages. Okay. But and we do have constitutions in Braille available for
that is commendable.
Yeah. So
commendable, because that is an aspect in this country that is sometimes overlooked.
Yes, definitely. So many vulnerable groups are often left out, people with disabilities especially, and children as well.
Absolutely. I love the inclusivity there. All right. Thank you so much for that information, Ms. Hasselman. Now, Namibia, if you are just tuning in, you are tuned into an information sharing session for the OMAS this morning, and I am joined in the studio by Ms. Ingrid Hasselman. She is from the Office of the Ombudsman, and she's Chief of Office there. Now, you too can be part of this conversation by following our discussion on our social media platforms, where we are currently streaming this show live. Now, on Facebook, we are at the Government Information Center, or you can also stream us live on our YouTube channel, and our handle there is the Government Information Center. Be part of this conversation by adding your contributions on our comment sections on all our social media platforms, where we are currently streaming this show live. Now, Ms. Hasselman, now reflecting on Namibia's progress so far, can you briefly provide an update on the status of the National Human Rights Action Plan dating back to 2015-2020?
Yes, so there was never a comprehensive review of this plan. So it is actually a national development plan. So it is a government plan. And different offices and ministries and agencies and stakeholders are supposed, even from the private sector, are supposed to be implementing this plan, or were supposed to be implementing this plan, to make sure that there is human rights based planning done and budgeting done, and human rights is so cross-sectoral about over all spheres of government activities and people's private life. So the role that the Ombudsman will play in terms of reviewing this plan will be just to coordinate and to give expert advice. But really the people who need to review the plan are those ones who were supposed to implement them. So the Ombudsman will coordinate this process and consult with regional and local authorities, as well as civil society organizations and other offices, ministries and agencies, the key line ministries who are responsible for implementation, to find out how well did this plan work, are there any gaps in the plan, and then also to develop now a successor plan for another 5-year period, and then to make sure that the new and emerging issues that affect Namibians are incorporated into that plan. And one such area is the area of business and human rights, because when people conduct business, those businesses often impact on everyday people's lives in terms of the land rights of indigenous people, people's labor rights, and just in the area of environmental justice.
Okay. Now, Ms. Hasselman, having mentioned about the successor plan, Briefly talk to us about what roles the ministries or OMAs, as you rightfully mentioned, civil societies and regional authorities play in shaping that very important document, which is the successor plan.
So the very first thing that we are coordinating is to have in all the key ministries to have a focal person in those offices, ministries and agencies who will be dedicated to consider the plan and report on its implementation. And then we will also be consulting civil society organizations, and really no one will be left out, because the idea is that when we develop a new successor plan, it must be a very realistic plan and a measurable plan, and one that incorporates the voices of everyone.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, now let's consider the role of business society. You have, mentioned there that the business society is to be considered as well. I want to find out, what role does the business and human rights play in shaping Namibia's future in human rights priorities?
So the aspect of business and human rights, especially when we look at areas such as manufacturing, agriculture, and the extractive industries like mining activities, all of those things are being practiced by businesses in Namibia that are sometimes local businesses, but also due to foreign investments, where businesses from other countries come and participate in investment opportunities here in Namibia. And the role of the Ombudsman is really to make sure that all of these government policies and laws with regard to how people are supposed to be conducting business, to make sure that there's a balance between economic prosperity whilst also taking into consideration the rights of people, because development is important, but development must go hand in hand with corporate social responsibility and respect for the environment and respect for the rights of people. So that is really the role of the Ombudsman, to just make sure that human rights are also safeguarded in the way that people conduct business.
All right. Now, shifting gears to institutional reform and legal frameworks. What is the status of the Ombudsman's bill, and what key reform does it propose, particularly in relation to compliance with the Paris Principles?
Okay, so let me start by explaining what the Paris Principles are. So the Ombudsman is a national human rights institution. They have them in more than 100 countries over the world. So in order to make sure that these institutions are respected, there are certain standards or guidelines to which they must comply with. And this is what is referred to as the Paris Principles. So the Ombudsman Act, like I said earlier, was enacted back in 1990 when these Paris Principles didn't even exist. So that is why there is a need for the Ombudsman Act to be reformed. So there is an Ombudsman's bill, and really the goal of this bill is to see to it that the Ombudsman gains independence from the Ministry of Justice and Labour Relations and is assigned its own budget, so that with its own accounting officer, to make sure that the Ombudsman can prioritize all of its strategies and fully and effectively implement its mandate.
Okay. Now, closely tied to that, I want to find out from you, how will the enactment of the bill, of the Ombudsman's bill, enhance the institutional capacity and independence of this office of the Ombudsman?
So one of the things that the bill wants to do is to capacitate or enhance rather the mandate of the children's advocate. So the children's advocate is provided for in the Child Care and Protection Act, which is a very comprehensive law that safeguards the rights of children in the country. So the role of the children's advocate will basically be to, amongst other things, advocate for the rights of children and monitor the implementation of that act. Okay. So that person, in terms of the Ombudsman's bill, will be appointed as a deputy ombudsman. And then, in addition to capacitating the children's advocate, the bill will also see to it that there is more transparent appointment criteria for the appointment of an ombudsman, okay, as well as to make sure that there's budget security for the ombudsman.
Okay. Now, away from the Ombudsman's bill, let's now shift the focus to particularly vulnerable groups. And I'd like to single out children. What are the core responsibilities of the children's advocate within the office of the Ombudsman?
So the very first responsibility is to receive and investigate complaints about children. So it can be any complaint about any child, and anybody can come and lay that complaint to the Ombudsman via the mandate of the children's advocate. And the second one is to monitor the service delivery. So in terms of the Child Care and Protection Act, the Ministry of Gender, Equality and Child Welfare is responsible to implement that act, to safeguard and to protect children. So the role of the children's advocate is then to be a watchdog, so to speak, of that ministry, to make sure that children actually receive the services that they are entitled to in terms of that act, and also other pieces of legislation that provides for services to children, like the Education Act. So the children's advocate really speaks for children, because children often don't have voices.
Okay. Now, Ms. Hasselman, building onto that you've just alluded to now, are there any opportunities to integrate children's rights more systematically across government programs and policies, particularly through the better data collection and service delivery?
Yes, it is very important that children's issues are incorporated across government policies and plans, especially when it comes to budgeting, because you cannot do anything for a child if there is no funds set aside for that child. So that is why it is extremely important that children's voices are also heard in this process. And the role of the children's advocate is really to also advocate for policy reforms in terms of implementation. There is established by the Child Care and Protection Act what we call the Children's Fund, where government is supposed to put money into that fund to fund projects that is geared towards safeguarding the rights of children. And there's also a children's advisory council that is established by that piece of legislation, and every or the executive directors from key ministries like the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Gender are supposed to form part of this committee to sit and strategize surrounding child protection in the country.
Okay, that is very good to note, right? As you rightfully earlier on mentioned, children shouldn't just be, seen, but they need to be heard too.
Yes.
It's very important that they are now being included on the high table as well.
Definitely.
Right. Ms. Hasselman, as we draw closer to the end of our brief discussion this morning, I'd like to find out from you, how can the Government Information Center, as part of your awareness creation campaigns, how can the Government Information Center support your proactive dissemination of information related to these very important initiatives and to enhance public engagement around human rights?
Basically, by creating or continuing to create a platform for information sharing and for awareness raising, because the Ombudsman cannot be efficient in its duty if people do not know, have access to information, and people do not know about their rights. Because there is an African proverb that says that the baby on the mother's back who does not cry will die. And that is why it is so important for people to know what their rights are in order to complain then when their rights are not being protected or respected. It is just good for a society to live in a human rights based, like in an environment where people's rights to dignity and equality and so forth are respected. So the role is really to make sure that there are spaces for information sharing and or continue to do so, because only in that way can we be effective as a nation to achieve our collective goals.
All right. Ms. Hasselman, thank you so much for taking our time from your busy schedule to come and educate us about the role of the Office of the Ombudsman as a national human rights institution. We have learned a lot from this discussion this morning. We appreciate the work that you are doing, and we are glad that you're visible and making use of platforms such as the Government Information Center to create more awareness and to reach, to penetrate through to your stakeholders and disseminate more information that is relevant, current, and accurate, of course.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Namibia, that has also brought us to the end of the first edition of the OMAS information sharing session. As always, we were live from the Government Information Center. I have been your host, Hileni Felepo-Samuela, from myself and the GIC crew. Please do not despair. We are bringing you another edition shortly under the flagship of the OMAS information sharing session. For now, take care.